She was sleeping on a friend's couch when evil walked through an unlocked door. 4 minutes. That's all it took for a serial predator to silence a 19-year-old girl's screams, carry her barefoot into a freezing winter night, and vanish. The pillow where Brianna Dennison's head had rested bore a silver dollar-sized bloodstain and bite marks where her face had been forced into the fabric. Her cell phone, her shoes, her entire life remained behind. Only Brianna was gone. 26 days later, a man returning from his subway lunch break would discover bright neon orange socks protruding from snow in a vacant field. Those socks were still attached to feet. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in Nevada history. Over 1,700 volunteers searched. 700 men voluntarily gave their DNA. A community raised $150,000 in 5 days to process a DNA backlog that might hold the killer's identity. Blue ribbons appeared on every street corner, every car antenna, every telephone pole across Reno. A city united behind a single demand: bring Bree back. They found her killer. They brought him to justice. And then Brianna's mother did something extraordinary. She transformed unspeakable grief into legislation that has since generated over 1,000 DNA matches to crimes, preventing countless future victims from suffering her daughter's fate. This is the story of how a 19-year-old psychology student with a 1,000-watt smile became the catalyst for groundbreaking DNA legislation. How a former Marine with a fetish for women's underwear escalated from serial rape to murder. How a community's unprecedented mobilization brought a monster to death row. And how tragedy, while it can never be undone, can be transformed into protection for those who come after. This is the story of Brianna Dennison. Before we begin, if you believe victims deserve justice and their stories deserve to be told, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Crime Unknown for deep dives into cases that changed everything. And leave a comment telling me if your state has DNA collection laws like Brianna's law. Your engagement keeps these stories alive and helps us honor victims like Brianna Dennison. Brianna Zunino Dennison was born March 29, 1988, to Bridget and Jeffrey Denison. She entered the world with sparkling blue eyes that would become her most striking feature, eyes that seemed to radiate warmth and compassion to everyone who knew her. When Brianna was just 6 years old, tragedy struck the family. Her father, Jeffrey, died suddenly, leaving behind not only Brianna but also her toddler brother, Brighton. In that moment, everything changed for the little girl who had just started first grade. "We had to team up," Bridget would later recall, her voice carrying the weight of those difficult years. "She became very protective of me, and for good reason, because I was all she had left." The bond between mother and daughter transformed into something deeper than typical family connection. They became a unit, facing the world together. Brianna took on responsibilities beyond her years, watching over her mother with fierce devotion, while simultaneously being the protective older sister Brighton needed. The family called her Breezy. Bridget chose the nickname deliberately, telling friends that her daughter reminded her of a breath of fresh air on a cool summer day. It was the perfect description for a girl whose presence seemed to brighten every room she entered. At just 5 feet tall and weighing 98 pounds, Brianna was petite, small enough that friends joked about her having to look up at almost everyone. But what she lacked in physical stature, she made up for in personality. Her smile was described by everyone who knew her as $1 million, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, like whatever you were saying was the most important thing she'd heard all day. Blue was her favorite color. This detail would seem insignificant in her life, but would become profoundly meaningful after her death, when an entire city draped itself in blue ribbons in her memory. Brianna was that rare combination of beautiful and genuinely kind. She wasn't just pretty, though, with those blue eyes and radiant smile. She certainly was. What made Brianna special was her tremendous compassion. She gravitated toward child psychology as her major because she genuinely wanted to help children, to make their lives better, to be the kind of steady presence she'd needed when her own father died. By January 2008, Brianna was a sophomore at Santa Barbara City College. She loved everything about California: the beaches, the sunsets, the slower pace compared to Reno. She'd call her mother constantly with photos of the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, wanting to share those beautiful moments even when they were hundreds of miles apart. "Look at this, Mom," she'd say over the phone. "Isn't it gorgeous?" Brianna was a rule follower. She didn't party excessively. She didn't take unnecessary risks. She maintained good grades, kept in close contact with family, never missed anyone's birthday. She was, by all accounts, the kind of daughter every parent hopes to raise: responsible, loving, thoughtful, and kind. She was also an adventurer. By 19 years old, Brianna had already traveled extensively. She'd been to Hawaii, Mexico, Jamaica, Japan, Italy, Egypt, Hungary, Austria, and France. She approached each trip with wide-eyed enthusiasm, soaking in different cultures, trying new foods, making friends wherever she went. Travel wasn't just about seeing new places for Brianna, it was about connecting with people, understanding different ways of life, expanding her view of the world. Her childhood friend, Danielle Dedamaso, would later say something that captured Brianna's essence perfectly. Brianna was the nicest person I have ever met. And throughout my life she's taught me a lot about kindness. That's who Brianna was. The nicest person. The kind one. The girl who taught others about kindness simply by being herself. In mid-January 2008, Brianna came home to Reno for Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. She was excited about SWAT 72, a 3-day college snowboarding festival featuring concerts and parties. It was the kind of event college students lived for: friends, music, snow, and celebration. On Saturday, January 19th, Brianna spent the afternoon doing something perfectly ordinary and beautifully mundane. She watched the movie 27 Dresses with her mother. They sat together in the living room, Brianna fighting a cold but still wanting to spend time with her mom before going out that evening. Around 9 p.m., Brianna hugged her mother goodbye. She carried a big bag she planned to change at her friend K.T. Hunter's house before heading to the concert. Bridget didn't ask her daughter to check in at the end of the night. She knew where Brianna would be staying. She trusted her daughter's judgment. There was no reason to worry. "I love you," Brianna said as she headed out the door. "I love you too, Breezy," Bridget replied. Those were the last words they would ever exchange. Those were the last hours they would ever spend together. Neither of them knew, as Brianna walked out that door with her bag of clothes and her plans for a fun night with friends, that a predator was already hunting near the University of Nevada, Reno campus. Neither of them knew that in less than 24 hours, Brianna would be gone. Neither of them knew that this ordinary Saturday would be the last normal day of their lives. The timeline of January 19th through 20th, 2008, has been reconstructed with excruciating precision. Investigators would eventually piece together Brianna's final hours minute by minute, creating a sequence of events so detailed that it reads like a tragic screenplay, except every word of it is horrifyingly real. Brianna and KT attended the SWAT 72 concert that Saturday night. The venue was packed with college students, the music was loud, the energy was high. Between 12:30 and 1 a.m., they met up with their friend Jessica Deal. The three young women were having the kind of night 19-year-olds are supposed to have: dancing, laughing, making memories. Around 2 a.m., they took a shuttle bus to downtown Reno's Sands Regency Casino Hotel. Hungry after hours of dancing, they settled into Mel's Diner, a 24-hour restaurant where college students often ended their nights. They ordered breakfast food, pancakes, eggs, bacon, the perfect end to a fun evening. Around 3:30 a.m. on Sunday, January 20th, four male friends dropped Brianna and KT off at 1395 McKay Court. The house was unremarkable from the outside, a burnt orange, two-story rental near the UNR campus, exactly the kind of place college students lived. But it had an unusual arrangement that would prove critical to what happened next. The house functioned almost like a hotel. Students living there locked their individual bedroom doors for privacy, but left the front door unlocked in case someone forgot their keys or came home late. It was a system based on trust and convenience, two things that make sense in a college environment but that can prove deadly when a predator is watching. That front door had glass panes. Anyone standing on the street could see directly into the living room. The layout provided no privacy, no protection from prying eyes. Brianna and KT were both arguing with their boyfriends that night. The kind of relationship drama that seems important at 19 but is usually forgotten by morning. Rather than crowd into KT's bed with Jessica, Brianna made a decision that would seal her fate. She chose to sleep on the leather couch in the living room. KT gave her 2 blankets, a pillow, and a teddy bear. She wanted to make sure her friend was comfortable. "You sure you're okay out here?" KT asked. "Yeah, I'm fine," Brianna replied. "I'll see you in the morning." Around 4 a.m., KT said goodnight and went to her bedroom with her dog, locking the door behind her. She had no way of knowing that lock would prevent her from hearing what was about to happen just feet away. At 4:23 a.m., Brianna sent her last text message to her boyfriend in Oregon. The content of that message has never been publicly released, but it was the last communication Brianna would ever send to anyone. Somewhere between 4:23 a.m. and 9:45 a.m., a predator entered the house. Interestingly, he didn't use the unlocked front door, the obvious point of entry. Instead, he came through the rear entrance. But investigators believe he had been watching through those glass panes in the front door. He had seen the tiny young woman settle onto the couch. He had watched her arrange the blankets. He had waited for the house to fall silent. Then he struck. What happened next lasted only seconds, but the evidence it left behind told a horrific story. On the pillow, where Brianna's head had rested, investigators found a silver dollar-sized bloodstain. The stain had two distinct spots and a spatter pattern. The pillow fabric showed bite marks where something or someone had been pressed into it with tremendous force. Forensic analysis would later conclude that someone had shoved Brianna's face hard into that pillow, hard enough to cause an actively bleeding injury to her mouth, nose, or throat. Hard enough to leave impressions in the fabric, hard enough to silence her screams before they could wake anyone in the house. The attack was swift, brutal, and efficient. This wasn't someone acting impulsively. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Brianna vanished barefoot into the freezing winter night. She was wearing only a white tank top and pink sweatpants, no shoes, no coat, no protection against January temperatures. Her cell phone remained on the coffee table. Her purse sat undisturbed. Her shoes were still by the couch. Her entire life was still in that house. Only Brianna was gone. At 9:45 a.m., KT emerged from her bedroom. She walked into the living room, expecting to find her friend still sleeping on the couch, probably curled up under the blankets with the teddy bear. Instead, she found the couch empty. The blankets were disturbed. The pillow was there, though KT wouldn't notice the bloodstain immediately. Brianna's belongings were scattered around the room, her phone, her purse, her shoes. But Brianna was gone. KT called out. Brianna? No response. She checked the bathroom, empty. She knocked on other roommates' doors. No one had seen Brianna. She called Brianna's cell phone. It rang from the coffee table. The panic started as confusion, then quickly escalated to fear. Where would Brianna go without her phone, without her purse, without her shoes? It made no sense. None of this made any sense. Around 10 a.m., KT called 911. "My friend is missing," she told the dispatcher, her voice shaking. "Her whole life is here. Her phone, her purse, everything. She wouldn't leave without these things. Something is wrong." Lieutenant Robert McDonald of the Reno Police Department was off duty that Sunday morning. He was probably enjoying coffee, maybe reading the newspaper, looking forward to a relaxing day. Then his phone rang. "We need you to come in," the voice said. "We have a missing college student. Suspicious circumstances." Lieutenant McDonald headed to the station immediately. He had been a police officer long enough to develop instincts about cases, and this one triggered every alarm bell in his head. This was a case that didn't have a good sound to it right from the beginning, he would later recall. Within hours of arriving at the scene, investigators made a discovery that transformed the case from a missing person investigation into something far more sinister. They processed the blood-stained pillow. They collected DNA samples from the couch, from the living room, from the rear entrance. Then, they ran those samples through their database. The DNA found at Brianna's abduction scene matched DNA from 2 previous sexual assaults near the UNR campus, one in November 2007 and one in December 2007, just weeks before Brianna disappeared. The realization hit like a physical blow. They weren't looking for someone who had taken Brianna in a moment of opportunity. They were hunting a serial rapist who had just escalated to kidnapping. And given the violence indicated by that blood-stained pillow, investigators feared he had already escalated even further. They feared Brianna was already dead. The attacks began in October 2007 and followed a chilling pattern of increasing violence. Each assault occurred within a 4-block radius of the UNR campus. Each victim was a petite young woman. Each attack happened in the early morning hours. And each incident showed the perpetrator becoming bolder, more violent, more willing to take risks. The first attack happened on October 22, 2007, at 1 a.m. The location was almost unbelievable in its audacity. A campus parking garage located directly next door to the campus police station. A female UNR student in her 20s was returning to her vehicle after a late night of studying. She was walking through the dimly lit garage, her keys in hand, her mind probably on getting home and getting some sleep. She never saw him coming. Suddenly, she felt cold metal press against her head. A gun. Someone had a gun to her head. "Don't say anything or the safety comes off," a calm voice said behind her. The calmness of his voice was almost more terrifying than the gun. He wasn't frantic, wasn't emotional, wasn't shouting. He spoke as if he were giving directions to the grocery store, cold, methodical, controlled. He sexually assaulted her right there in the parking garage, mere feet from the campus police station. When he finished, he took her underwear, slipping it into his pocket like a souvenir. Then, he did something that would haunt the victim. He asked her a question. "Are you going to tell the police?" The question revealed his calculation. He was thinking about consequences, about evidence, about whether she would report him. He wasn't acting on impulse. He was planning, thinking ahead, assessing risks. The victim, who had participated in her high school rifle team and knew firearms, made a calculated decision of her own. She initially chose not to report the crime. "I didn't want my body to be a crime scene," she would later testify in court, her voice tight with emotion. "I'd already been through enough. I wanted to forget about it." She tried to move on, to pretend it hadn't happened, to reclaim her life through willful denial. But the memory wouldn't fade. The fear wouldn't subside. And when investigators contacted her in late January 2008, after Brianna disappeared, she knew she had to come forward. Her silence might have contributed to another woman's suffering. The second attack happened on November 13, 2007. The victim was a 21-year-old woman walking through an off-campus parking lot. It was late. College students keep odd hours, but she felt relatively safe in the familiar area near campus. She never heard him approach. Suddenly, someone grabbed her from behind. Strong hands seized her body. Before she could process what was happening, he knocked her to the ground. She hit the pavement hard, the impact jarring through her body. "Don't scream," he commanded. She screamed anyway. Loud, piercing, desperate screams that echoed through the parking lot. Her screams saved her. The attacker panicked. He released her and fled into the darkness. But in his haste to escape, he dropped something. Several condoms. The condoms fell to the ground, unnoticed by the fleeing attacker, but discovered immediately by responding officers. Those condoms contained DNA. That DNA would prove critical to the investigation. The third attack, the most serious before Brianna's murder, occurred on December 16, 2007, shortly after 1 a.m. The location was just 500 feet from where Brianna would be abducted 5 weeks later. The victim was a 22-year-old foreign exchange student from Taiwan. She was returning to her apartment after a night out, walking the familiar route she'd taken dozens of times before. The UNR campus area felt safe to her. It was well lit, frequently patrolled, filled with other students. She never saw him coming. Someone grabbed her from behind. A large hand clamped over her mouth and nose, cutting off her air supply. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't fight. He lifted her completely off the ground. Her 5'2" frame was no match for his strength. Then he threw her down violently. She hit the ground with tremendous force. Her glasses shattered on impact, leaving her vision blurred and disoriented. Before she could gather herself, his hands were around her throat. Not just choking her, but using a specific technique, a technique that someone trained in combat or martial arts would know. A technique designed to render someone unconscious quickly and efficiently. The world went dark. She blacked out. When she regained consciousness, everything was different. She was no longer on the street. She was inside a vehicle, moving. A hooded sweatshirt had been placed over her face, preventing her from seeing where she was being taken, preventing her from seeing her attacker's face. "If you see my face, if you tell the police, I will kill you," he said. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. He meant it. Even though she never saw his face, he was very careful about that. She noticed details. She noticed everything she could, because some part of her brain understood these details might be the only way to catch him, the only way to prevent him from doing this to someone else. She noticed he was a white male. She noticed his arms were tanned, suggesting someone who worked outdoors or spent significant time in the sun. She noticed soft hair on his chin, not a full beard, just the stubble of someone who hadn't shaved recently. She noticed he had no body odor. He was clean, recently showered perhaps. She noticed his pubic hair was shaved, which struck her as unusual and specific. She noticed his fingers were thick, suggesting someone who did manual labor. She noticed the vehicle's interior. It was an extended cab pickup truck or SUV, she could tell from the space and the seating arrangement. The interior was gray velour, a specific texture she could feel against her skin. The radio had red and blue lights that she could see peripherally, even with the sweatshirt over her face. And she noticed something that would prove to be one of the most important details. A baby shoe on the floorboards. Just one shoe small, probably for a toddler. It was an oddly domestic detail in the midst of horror, suggesting her attacker had a child or access to a child. He sexually assaulted her in that vehicle. When he finished, he kept her underwear, adding it to his collection. Then he told her something chilling: he might return. He let her go, dumping her on a street she didn't recognize. She was disoriented, terrified, violated, but alive. She reported the assault immediately, providing every detail she could remember to investigators. 24 hours before Brianna disappeared, someone attempted to break into this December victim's residence. They attacked the back door with such force that the door bowed outward. The doorknob was so damaged it had to be completely replaced. Lieutenant McDonald believed the attacker was returning to his previous victim, intending to make good on his threat. Something, perhaps the reinforced door, perhaps seeing someone inside, perhaps simply changed plans, caused him to abort the attempt. Instead, he went looking for a new victim. Instead, on January 20th, 2008, he found Brianna Dennison sleeping on a couch visible through glass doors. The pattern was clear to investigators, though it wouldn't be publicly confirmed until after the arrest. The attacks were escalating in violence. October, sexual assault at gunpoint, but the victim was left at the scene. November, attempted assault interrupted. December, kidnapping, strangulation to unconsciousness, assault in a vehicle, threats of murder. January, actual murder. Deputy District Attorney Elliot Sattler would later tell jurors, James Biella graduated from serial rapist to murderer. The graduation was complete. The pattern of escalation had reached its inevitable conclusion. And a 19-year-old girl, who just wanted to sleep on her friend's couch after a concert, had become his final victim. The search for Brianna Dennison became one of the most massive manhunts in Nevada history. Within 24 hours of KT's 911 call, the case had captured the attention of the entire region. Within 48 hours, it had national media coverage. Within a week, it had mobilized an entire community in ways law enforcement had never seen before. By January 21st, the FBI had officially joined Reno police in the investigation. Federal resources poured into the case. Additional investigators, forensic specialists, database access, technical support. The FBI's involvement signaled the seriousness of the situation. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was a potential abduction by a serial offender. Over 1,700 volunteers ultimately participated in physical searches. Think about that number. 1,700 people, not law enforcement, not professional searchers. Just ordinary citizens gave their time, their energy, and their hope to look for a girl many of them had never met. They searched a 100-square-mile area. They combed through neighborhoods, fields, parks, canyons, riverbeds. They walked through freezing January weather, their breath visible in the cold air, their fingers numb, their feet aching. They lifted manhole covers to check sewers. They crawled through culverts. They climbed into abandoned buildings. They left no place unsearched. KRNV reporter Victoria Campbell, covering the searches, called it one of the most chilling things I saw. Not chilling because of what they found, but chilling because of the desperation visible on every volunteer's face. The knowledge that each hour that passed made it less likely Brianna would be found alive. The weight of knowing that somewhere in this 100-square-mile area, a young woman might be hurt, might be dying, might already be dead. Nevada First Lady Dawn Gibbons didn't just make a statement of support. She physically joined search parties, walking alongside volunteers, getting her hands dirty. It was an unprecedented show of solidarity from the state's highest office. Electronic billboards across Reno displayed Brianna's face 24 hours a day. Casino marquees, usually advertising shows or promotions, instead showed Brianna's picture and the police hotline number. Every person driving through Reno saw her face. Every tourist visiting the casinos saw her picture. No one could claim ignorance. No one could say they hadn't heard about the missing girl. And then the blue ribbons appeared. It started organically. Someone tied a blue ribbon, Brianna's favorite color, to their car antenna. Someone else saw it and did the same. Within days, blue ribbons appeared on thousands of cars. Then they spread to mailboxes. Then to telephone poles. Then to storefront windows. Then to trees, fences, street signs, everywhere. The blue ribbons became a symbol of hope, a visual representation of a community's determination to bring Brianna home. If you drove through Reno in late January or early February 2008, you couldn't travel more than a few feet without seeing blue. The entire city draped itself in Brianna's favorite color. But the investigation faced a critical obstacle, one that would ultimately lead to revolutionary changes in Nevada law. The DNA collected from Brianna's abduction scene matched the DNA from the November and December assaults. That confirmation made the situation even more dire. Investigators knew they were hunting a serial offender who had escalated to kidnapping, but when they ran the DNA profile through the national database, they found no matches. Then they discovered something that filled them with equal parts hope and frustration. The Washoe County Crime Lab had 3,000 convicted offender DNA samples sitting on shelves, unprocessed. 3,000 samples that could potentially identify the suspect. 3,000 samples that were just sitting there due to lack of funding. Processing those samples would cost $150,000. The crime lab didn't have that kind of money in their budget. They didn't have half that money. The samples would continue sitting on those shelves while the investigation stalled and while the killer potentially struck again. Unless something changed. On February 3, 2008, Sheriff Mike Haley made a direct and unprecedented appeal to the community. He stood before television cameras and spoke with raw honesty about the situation. Where a government can't resolve a problem, a community can, he said. His voice carried both frustration with the bureaucratic limitations and hope that the citizens of Reno would rise to the challenge. He asked them to donate money to process the DNA backlog. He explained exactly why it mattered. The killer's DNA might be in that backlog. Processing those samples might generate a match. A match might lead to an arrest. An arrest might save lives. The response was extraordinary. Within 5 days, just 5 days, Reno residents and businesses had not only raised $150,000 but had exceeded the goal. Money continued pouring in. Individuals sent checks for $10, for $50, for $100. Businesses contributed thousands. Local casinos made significant donations. This was their city too, their community, and they wanted to help. The community had spoken. Find Brianna. Find her killer, whatever it takes. Processing began immediately. Lab technicians worked around the clock, running samples through the system as quickly as scientifically possible. Every processed sample offered a tiny glimmer of hope. Maybe this one will match. Maybe this one will be the break we need. But the results would take weeks. DNA processing can't be rushed beyond a certain point without compromising accuracy. So, investigators waited, searched, and followed every other lead while the lab worked. The volunteer response extended beyond the physical searches. Over 700 men voluntarily submitted DNA samples to eliminate themselves as suspects. Think about what that means. 700 men voluntarily gave their DNA, allowing investigators to collect their genetic information, to process it, to keep it on file just to help with the investigation. They did this knowing their DNA would be permanently in the system. They did this knowing it could implicate them in other crimes if they had committed any. They did this simply because they wanted to help, wanted to narrow the pool of suspects, wanted to contribute in any way they could to finding Brianna's killer. More than 5,000 tips flooded in through secret witness and police hotlines. 5,000. Every single tip had to be investigated, cross-referenced, followed up on. The vast majority led nowhere. Someone thought they saw Brianna at a gas station in California. Someone had a theory about a homeless man they'd seen near campus. Someone wanted to point fingers at an ex-boyfriend or estranged neighbor. But investigators couldn't dismiss anything. Every tip, no matter how unlikely, had to be checked. Because the one tip they dismissed might be the one that mattered. The one lead they didn't follow might be the one that could have saved time, could have generated a break in the case. The investigation consumed the lives of everyone involved. Detectives worked 20-hour days. Volunteers searched until they physically couldn't continue. Brianna Dennison existed in a state of suspended animation, unable to grieve because Brianna hadn't been confirmed dead, unable to hope because deep down she knew no one survived this long after an abduction. On Valentine's Day, February 14, 2008, Brianna made an emotional public appeal. She stood before cameras, her face showing the strain of 26 days of not knowing, and spoke directly to her daughter. "I just want to say to my daughter Brianna that I love you and I miss you," she began, her voice cracking. "Nobody's ever giving up. There are thousands of people looking for you, and I don't want you to give up." She paused, fighting to maintain composure. "I know you're hurt, honey, but I really need you to hang in there." Brianna spoke as if Brianna could hear her, as if her daughter was out there somewhere, hurt but alive, waiting to be found, as if love and determination alone could will her daughter back to safety. The next day, the waiting ended, but not with the answer anyone hoped for. February 15, 2008, started as an ordinary Friday for Albert Jimenez. He worked at EE Technologies in southeast Reno, a light industrial area near the interstate. Around noon, he took his lunch break and drove to Subway for a sandwich. Nothing unusual, Nothing remarkable. Just another day. At approximately 12:13 p.m., Jimenez was returning from his lunch break. Rather than drive directly back to EE Technologies, he cut across a vacant lot, probably a shortcut he took regularly, a way to save a few minutes of walking. That shortcut changed everything. As he walked across the lot, something caught his eye among discarded tree limbs in a shallow ditch. Something bright. Something that didn't belong. Bright, neon orange fabric. He walked closer, curious. The orange fabric appeared to be socks. Jimenez found this odd. Why would someone throw away a perfectly good pair of socks in a vacant lot? Then he noticed the orange socks were attached to feet. His first thought was that it had to be a mannequin, some kind of store display that had been dumped illegally. That made sense. That was logical. That was something his brain could process without completely falling apart. He moved closer still. He could see more now. He could see legs. He could see a body. He could see teeth. He could see a wound on the shoulder. This wasn't a mannequin. This was a person. This was a body. Albert Jimenez didn't have a cell phone. He ran back to EE Technologies, his heart pounding, his breath coming in gasps. His manager later described him as pale and shaking when he burst through the door. "Call 911, Jimenez said. "There's a body. In the field, there's a body." The manager called immediately. Within minutes, the vacant lot was swarming with police vehicles, crime scene investigators, the medical examiner's office. Yellow tape went up. The area was secured, and investigators began the grim process of documenting the scene. The location was approximately 8 miles from McKay Court, 8 miles from where Brianna had last been seen. It was in a light industrial area, about 1 minute off the interstate. Easy access. Easy to dispose of a body and disappear back onto the highway within seconds. The body had been concealed by recent heavy snowfall and a discarded Christmas tree that someone had thrown into the ditch. Reno had experienced significant snow in late January and early February. That snow had completely covered the remains, hiding them from anyone who might pass by. Only that morning's warming temperatures, unseasonably warm for mid-February, had melted enough snow to expose the neon orange socks. A few degrees colder, and Albert Jimenez wouldn't have seen anything. A different route back to work, and the body might have remained hidden for weeks or months longer. But the temperature had warmed. And Jimenez had taken that particular shortcut. And now the waiting was over. Lieutenant Robert McDonald walked out of the field with his head down, his shoulders slumped. Reporters surrounded him, shouting questions, demanding confirmation of what everyone already suspected. "I was 95% certain that who we were dealing with here was Brianna," he told them. His voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have to deliver. The hope of finding her alive had left. Dr. Ellen Clark, Washoe County Medical Examiner, performed the autopsy on February 16th. Her findings were as heartbreaking as they were conclusive. Cause of death: strangulation. The body was found naked, except for those neon orange socks. Brianna had been sexually assaulted either before or after death. The decomposition made precise timing impossible to determine. The most telling injuries were on Brianna's neck. Abrasions and scrapes consistent with elastic bands from underwear being used as a ligature. Not rope, not a cord, not hands. Underwear. Specifically, the elastic bands from the waistband and leg openings of women's thong underwear. The killer had strangled her with underwear. At the scene, investigators found something that would prove crucial to the case. 2 pairs of women's thong underwear intertwined under Brianna's right knee. They weren't just near the body. They weren't scattered randomly. They were carefully positioned, deliberately placed for investigators to find. The first pair was pink thong underwear. DNA testing revealed it contained genetic material from 3 sources: Brianna, the underwear's owner, a woman who lived at the McKay Court house, and the suspect. Police believed this pair had been used to strangle Brianna. The killer had taken the underwear from a roommate's laundry or bedroom, used it to murder Brianna, then left it with the body. The second pair was even more disturbing: a small black thong with Pink Panther cartoon characters and pink hearts decorating the fabric. It was the kind of underwear a young woman might buy as fun, playful, youthful. DNA testing on this pair revealed genetic material from an unknown woman, not Brianna, and an unknown man who was not the killer. The owner of this pair was never identified despite extensive public appeals asking women to check their underwear drawers to see if they were missing this specific pair. Police believed the killer had deliberately left this calling card, a trophy from another victim, positioned for investigators to find. Commander Liga Struffert stated explicitly that the underwear was put there for them to find. The implications were chilling. This meant there was at least one other victim, someone who had been assaulted, someone whose underwear had been taken, someone who either hadn't reported the crime or hadn't been connected to this investigation. It meant the suspect had a fetish for women's underwear, taking trophies from his victims and keeping them like souvenirs. It meant he was even more dangerous than they'd realized. Deputy Chief Jim Johns addressed reporters with grim certainty. The totality of the information in this case leads us to believe it is a sexually motivated crime. I would say this is a serial rapist. We have 2, probably 3 cases linked through DNA. Actually, the number was higher. But investigators couldn't reveal everything they knew. They had to hold certain details back, details only the real killer would know. By Monday, February 18th, the discovery site had transformed into something sacred. Hundreds of people made pilgrimages to the vacant lot. They brought flowers, roses, carnations, lilies. They brought candles, tea lights, pillar candles, vigil candles that would burn for hours. They brought stuffed animals, teddy bears, rabbits, dogs. They brought blue balloons that floated above the makeshift memorial, visible from the highway. A "Bring Bree Back" flyer was tacked to a telephone pole at the corner of the field. No one had the heart to take it down, even though the mission had changed from "Bring her back alive" to "Bring her killer to justice." On February 23rd, approximately 3,000 people braved a snowstorm to attend a vigil at the Reno Sparks Convention Center. 3,000. The venue was packed beyond capacity. People stood in aisles, sat on floors, pressed against walls. No one wanted to leave. Everyone wanted to be there. Blue ribbons were placed on the governor's mansion. Governor Jim Gibbons issued a statement encouraging all Nevadans to display blue ribbons until Brianna's burial. The symbol of hope had transformed into a symbol of mourning. But the community continued wearing blue. We remember. We care. We won't forget. Bridget Denison found only one small piece of solace in the horror. "At least I'm not waiting 4 years later wondering," she told reporters. Her voice was hollow, exhausted. "That's about the only positive I can get out of it. 26 days of not knowing. 26 days of hoping against hope. 26 days of searching, praying, bargaining with the universe. And now she knew. Now she could grieve. Now she could bury her daughter. Now she could focus every ounce of her energy on finding the monster who had done this. For 10 months, investigators pursued thousands of leads. They interviewed 100 registered sex offenders within a 1-mile radius of McKay Court. They showed them Brianna's picture. They asked about their whereabouts on January 20th. They collected DNA samples from those without alibis. They processed the DNA backlog that the community had funded. 3,000 samples run through the system, 3,000 opportunities for a match. No match. They ran the profile through national databases repeatedly, hoping that someone, somewhere, had been arrested for something that would generate a hit. Still nothing. The suspect's description was clear from the survivors. White male, 28 to 40 years old, 5'6" to 6 feet tall, driving a 2005 to 2006 Toyota Tacoma extended cab pickup with gray velour interior. He used strangulation techniques, suggesting combat or martial arts training. He collected victims' underwear as trophies. He had a child or access to a child, evidenced by the baby shoe in his truck. But no one could identify him. The October victim never saw his face. The December victim never saw his face. He'd been extremely careful about that. And Brianna couldn't tell them anything at all. The investigation seemed stalled. Detectives continued working every lead, but the case was growing cold with each passing month. The media coverage decreased. The daily updates stopped. The public's attention drifted to other stories, other tragedies. But behind the scenes, investigators never stopped. They kept processing tips. They kept following leads. They kept working. And then, on November 1st, 2008, the 5,000th tip came through the secret witness hotline. A friend of a woman named Carlene Harmon called the police. The friend reported that Harmon had found petite-sized women's thong underwear in her boyfriend's truck console. Harmon had confronted her boyfriend about the underwear back in September 2008 while helping him move back from Washington State. "Why do you have women's underwear in your truck?" she had demanded. His response: he claimed he had stolen the underwear from a woman at the laundromat. Stolen underwear from a laundromat? The tip immediately caught investigators' attention. They knew their suspect collected victims' underwear as trophies. They knew he kept them, displayed them somehow, valued them. And now, here was a report of a man with unexplained women's underwear in his vehicle underwear he claimed to have stolen. Carleen Harmon's boyfriend was James Michael Biella. The name meant nothing to investigators initially. They ran it through their databases. No felony convictions, no DNA on file, nothing that would have flagged him earlier in the investigation. But his background started filling in a picture that made investigators' instincts fire. James Michael Biella was 27 years old, born June 29, 1981, in Chicago. His family moved to Reno in 1990 when he was 9 years old, so he was a long-time local, someone who knew the area intimately. He graduated from West Valley High School in Spokane Valley, Washington, in 1999. After graduation, he joined the Marines. He completed basic training in San Diego and served at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. But his military career was short-lived. In 2001, Biella was dishonorably discharged for drug use. A dishonorable discharge, the worst type of military discharge, reserved for serious misconduct. It was the military equivalent of a felony conviction, carrying significant stigma and consequences. After his discharge, Biella returned to the Reno area. By 2008, he worked as a pipefitter and construction worker. Crucially, and this detail made investigators' eyes widen, he had worked construction jobs on the UNR campus. He knew that campus intimately. He knew which buildings were occupied at night, which parking garages had cameras, which routes students took, which areas had the best cover. He hadn't been randomly hunting. He had been hunting in an area he knew like the back of his hand. Biella trained sporadically at Charles Grassi Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Reno. He had achieved blue belt rank, one step above beginner. Blue belt meant he had learned fundamental techniques, including chokeholds, grappling, how to control an opponent, how to render someone unconscious quickly and quietly. The December victim had described being choked unconscious using a specific hand-cupping technique. The kind of technique someone trained in jiu-jitsu would know. Biella had a tumultuous relationship with Carleen Harmon, mother of his 4-year-old son. They were on again, off again, fighting constantly, breaking up and reconciling in an endless cycle of dysfunction. But they had a child together, which meant Biella had access to baby items. Baby shoes, for instance. The kind of baby shoe a victim might notice on the floorboards of his truck. Most significantly, Biella lived just 500 feet from the December 2007 victim's apartment on Gypsum Road. 500 feet, a 2-minute walk. He could have seen her coming and going. He could have watched her patterns. He could have known when she'd be walking home alone late at night. His residence was 5 minutes from McKay Court. 5 minutes from where Brianna had been sleeping on that couch. Investigators pulled his criminal record. Biella had one prior arrest. In 2002, he threatened a former girlfriend's neighbor with a knife while drunk. The incident was serious enough that criminal charges were filed. But he pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge in April 2003 and received DUI and alcohol counseling. A misdemeanor. Not a felony, just a misdemeanor. Because it was only a misdemeanor, no DNA sample was taken. Nevada law at the time required DNA collection only after felony convictions. Biella's DNA was never entered into any database. When investigators ran the crime scene DNA through the system looking for matches, Biella's profile wasn't there to be found. If he had been convicted of a felony, even a low-level felony, his DNA would have been collected. The November and December assaults would have generated matches. He would have been arrested before January 20th, 2008, before Brianna disappeared. Before he escalated to murder. This fact, that a simple difference between misdemeanor and felony conviction had prevented early detection, would later become the foundation for groundbreaking legislation. But in November 2008, investigators were focused on one thing: getting Biella's DNA legally. On November 7, 2008, Detective Adam Wignansky contacted Biella by phone. The conversation was carefully scripted. Wignansky explained that police were investigating a series of incidents near the UNR campus. He explained that they were collecting elimination samples from men who lived or worked in the area. He asked if Biella would be willing to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. Biella refused. Absolutely refused. He stated flatly that he would not provide a DNA sample voluntarily. Wignansky pressed gently. "It would really help us eliminate you from our investigation. If you have nothing to hide, this is the fastest way to clear yourself." But Biella held firm. No DNA sample. He did, however, claim that his girlfriend, Carleen Harmon, could provide an alibi for the nights of the attacks. When investigators questioned Carleen Harmon, her response was very different from what Biella had claimed. She stated she could not account for his whereabouts during the early morning hours of December 16, 2007, or January 20, 2008. She couldn't provide the alibi Biella claimed she could give. Investigators then asked Harmon a delicate question. Would she be willing to allow them to obtain DNA from their 4-year-old son? Collecting DNA from a child for a criminal investigation is ethically fraught and legally complex. But if Harmon consented, and if the child's DNA was analyzed, they could use familial DNA analysis. Familial DNA analysis works on a simple principle. Children inherit half their DNA from each parent. If you have a child's full DNA profile and one parent's DNA profile, you can mathematically determine what the other parent's DNA profile should look like. It's not as precise as a direct match, but it's enough to establish probable cause for obtaining the actual suspect's DNA. Carleen Harmon consented. On November 12, 2008, investigators collected a DNA sample from Biela's 4-year-old son. The sample went to the lab for expedited processing. Forensic analysts worked carefully through the familial DNA analysis. They had the crime scene DNA, the unknown male profile from Brianna's abduction scene, from the body discovery site, from the December 2007 rape scene. They had the child's full DNA profile. They had Carleen Harmon's DNA profile. They ran the analysis. The results showed that the biological father of this child could not be excluded as the source of DNA found at all 3 crime scenes. Could not be excluded. That's scientific language for, this is almost certainly the same person. But we need a direct sample to be 100% certain. But it was enough for probable cause. It was enough for an arrest warrant. It was enough to get James Michael Biela's DNA directly. Before making the arrest, investigators placed Biela under surveillance. They watched his patterns, his movements, his behaviors, and they noticed something significant. In March 2008, right after Brianna's body was discovered, right after police released the suspect's sketch and vehicle description, right after the case exploded across every news outlet, James Biela left Reno. He moved to Moses Lake, Washington, to work as a pipe fitter. He was gone within days of the body's discovery. We assume he went up to Washington to get out of this area, because the heat was on, Lieutenant McDonald told reporters months later. While in Washington, Biela sold his 2006 Toyota Tacoma to a dealership in Idaho. He got rid of the vehicle that matched the description survivors had given. He got rid of the truck with the gray velour interior and the baby shoe on the floorboards. But investigators located that truck. They seized it from the dealership. They processed every inch of it. Gray velour fibers from its interior matched fibers found on the December 2007 victim's clothing. The evidence was overwhelming. The familial DNA, the matching vehicle, the flight from Reno after the body was discovered, the sale of the vehicle, the refusal to provide DNA voluntarily. It was time to make the arrest. November 25, 2008, was the day before Thanksgiving. Parents across America were preparing for the holiday, shopping for turkey, baking pies, making travel plans. It was supposed to be a time of gratitude and family celebration. At 5:30 p.m., James Michael Biela arrived at Stepping Stones Children's Center on Corporate Drive in Reno. He was there to pick up his 4-year-old son from daycare, a routine he probably performed several times a week. He never saw the police vehicles until it was too late. Investigators had carefully chosen the timing and location. They wanted Biela in custody, but they didn't want a chase. They didn't want a standoff. They didn't want him barricaded inside his home with potential hostages. They wanted him out in the open, in a public place, with his young son nowhere near the actual arrest. As Biela walked toward the daycare entrance, officers surrounded him. He was arrested without incident, without resistance, without drama. One moment he was a free man picking up his child. The next moment, he was in handcuffs, being read his Miranda rights, being placed in the back of a police vehicle. Investigators immediately executed a search warrant on Biela's person and residence. They collected his DNA directly: cheek swabs, blood samples, hair samples. They wanted direct samples, not familial approximations. They wanted absolute certainty. The samples went to the Washoe County Crime Lab with highest priority processing. Lab technicians worked through the night. By 6 a.m. on November 26, Thanksgiving morning, Chief Michael Pullman stood before a room full of reporters to make an announcement that had been nearly 10 months in coming. "We have a 100% DNA match to all crime scenes," he announced. 100%. Not probable, not likely, 100% certain. James Michael Biela's DNA matched the DNA found at Brianna's abduction scene. It matched the DNA found where her body was discovered. It matched the DNA from the December 2007 rape. It matched the DNA from the November 2007 attempted assault. They had their man. Brianna's aunt, Lauren Denison, wearing a large button with Brianna's picture pinned to her coat, addressed reporters outside the police station. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was strong. "We're pleased that this person is off the street and he cannot hurt anyone else," she said. "Can you believe it? This is what we have been waiting for. Can you believe it? After 10 months, after 5,000 tips, after 1,700 volunteers searching, after 700 men providing DNA samples, after an entire community raising $150,000, after all of it they had him." The trial began May 10, 2010. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. DNA matching all crime scenes with 100% certainty, testimony from both surviving victims, the Pink Panther underwear left at the body dump site, evidence that Biella had fled to Washington after Brianna's body was discovered, and testimony from a co-worker who remembered Biella's chilling comment. That co-worker testified that on the day Brianna's body was found, when news reports confirmed a body had been discovered, Biella said, "The bitch probably had it coming. The bitch probably had it coming." Those words, spoken about a murdered 19-year-old girl, hung in the courtroom like poison. After approximately 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on May 27, 2010, on all 5 counts: first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and 3 counts of sexual assault. The penalty phase began immediately. The jury now faced the most difficult decision any jury can make: whether James Biella should be executed for his crimes. The defense presented extensive testimony about Biella's traumatic childhood. His mother testified about systematic domestic violence, how his father Joseph routinely beat her while the children watched, how they lived in terror, how the family was extremely poor. But prosecutor Elliot Sattler asked, "Joseph Biella was an atrocious man, but James Biella left that environment at age 18. He had 16 years removed from his father's violence. And then suddenly, at age 26, he snaps and starts raping and killing people? Is that enough to wipe away the stain of what he did to Brianna Dennison?" On June 1, 2010, Biella made an unsworn statement. Visibly shaken and crying, he said, "First off, I'm sorry. This is very difficult for me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry that this incident has destroyed several families. I regret that no matter what you decide is my fate, that I will never be able to see my son grow up and be a father to him." On June 2, 2010, after approximately 9 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously voted for the death penalty. Brianna Dennison's statement captured the community's resolve. "When James Michael Biella messed with my little girl, he messed with the wrong families, the wrong women, and the wrong city and state. All appeals have been exhausted." In April 2019, the Nevada Supreme Court unanimously denied Biella's appeal, with all 7 justices voting to affirm. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case. A death warrant was signed August 18, 2010, but no execution has been scheduled. Nevada has not executed anyone since 2006 due to lack of available execution drugs. James Michael Biella, now 43 years old, remains on Nevada's death row with all appeals exhausted. He will likely spend the remainder of his natural life in prison waiting for an execution that may never come. Even before Biella's conviction, Brianna Dennison had recognized a critical failure in the system. Biella's 2002 misdemeanor conviction meant his DNA was never collected. If Nevada law had required DNA collection for all arrests, investigators would have identified him after the November 2007 assault before Brianna was murdered. Brigitte partnered with Jan Sepich to advocate for arrestee DNA collection laws. Their first attempt in 2011 failed on the last night of the session. They returned in 2013 with Senate Bill 243, sponsored by Senator Debbie Smith. On April 22, 2013, the Nevada Senate passed the bill unanimously. Every single senator voted yes. The chamber erupted in a standing ovation. On May 29, 2013, Governor Brian Sandoval signed Brianna's law into statute. The law took effect July 1, 2013. Brianna's law requires a mandatory DNA cheek swab for anyone arrested for a felony. Samples are entered into CODIS and cross-referenced against unsolved crime scene DNA. In the first 4 months, over 4,700 DNA samples were collected. 31 DNA matches were made to crimes. By 2018, 5 years after implementation, Brianna's law had generated over 1,000 DNA matches to crimes. Retired Detective Dave Jenkins reflected, "There will be people who don't become victims because of that change in the law, and that would be a wonderful legacy." The community response was unprecedented. 1,700 volunteers searching, 700 men voluntarily submitting DNA, $150,000 raised in 5 days. 5,000 tips received. Blue ribbons appeared everywhere throughout Reno. 3,000 people attended a vigil in a snowstorm. Lieutenant McDonald reflected, Brianna became everyone's daughter. Sheriff Mike Haley's appeal captured the spirit. Where a government can't resolve a problem, a community can. The Bring Bride Justice Foundation, founded by Brianna Dennison, continues advocacy work for DNA collection laws, community safety education, and supporting victims' families. Almost exactly 10 years after Brianna disappeared, tragedy struck again. On January 9, 2018, 19-year-old Caitlin Marie Denison, Brianna's cousin, disappeared in Midland, Texas. On January 10th, Caitlin called her sister, Rachel, from a Walmart. During that call, Caitlin said, "This man makes me scared for my life." It was the last time Rachel heard from her sister. The case remains open and active. In January 2025, extensive searches were conducted but did not locate Caitlin. Rachel has addressed conspiracy theories. It's not helpful. It's hurtful. It's just an awful coincidence. There is no connection between the cases. Anyone with information should contact the Texas Department of Public Safety at area code 512-424-5074 or 1-800-234-623-243. Brianna Dennison was 19 years old when a serial predator strangled her in January 2008. She was a petite psychology student who wanted to work with children, whose favorite color was blue, who had a 1,000-watt smile. James Michael Biella remains on death row today, having exhausted all appeals. But Brianna's story doesn't end with her murder, or even with Biella's conviction. It continues in the 1,000-plus DNA matches Brianna's law has generated, solving and preventing crimes across Nevada. It continues in the 28 states that have implemented similar arrestee DNA collection laws. It continues in every case where DNA collected at felony arrest identifies a serial offender before they can escalate to more serious violence. Detective Dave Jenkins was right about Brianna's legacy. There will be people who don't become victims because of that change in the law, and that would be a wonderful legacy. The blue ribbons that once flew across Reno symbolized hope during desperate days of searching. Today they represent something more enduring. A community that united to bring justice, a mother who transformed grief into legislative action, and a young woman whose death changed Nevada's criminal justice system to protect countless others. Brianna's law stands as permanent testimony that while tragedy cannot be undone, it can be transformed into protection for those who come after. Every DNA sample collected, every match made, every crime prevented honors the memory of a 19-year-old who deserved to see her dreams come true, but instead became the catalyst for change that saves lives she never knew. This is how we remember Brianna Dennison. Not just as a victim, but as a force for change. Not just as a life lost, but as countless lives saved. Not just as a tragedy, but as a legacy that endures. If this story moved you, if Brianna's legacy matters to you, if you believe in justice and the power of community, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. It tells YouTube that stories like Brianna's deserve to be told, that victims deserve to be remembered, that justice matters. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about Brianna's law. Tell me if your state has similar legislation. Tell me if this story changed how you think about DNA collection or victim advocacy. Your voice matters. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. And please, subscribe to Crime Unknown. We tell the stories that need to be told, stories of victims who deserve justice, families who deserve answers, and cases that changed everything. We dig deep. We honor the victims. We search for truth. Every subscription helps us continue this work. Every like helps us reach more people. Every comment builds a community of people who care about justice. Brianna's law has generated over 1,000 DNA matches to crimes. It has solved cold cases. It has prevented future victims. It exists because people cared enough to act, to donate, to advocate, to change the system. You can be part of that legacy. Subscribe to Crime Unknown. Join a community that believes victims matter, that justice is worth fighting for, and that even in the darkest tragedies, there can be light. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for helping us keep Brianna's legacy alive. Until next time, this is Crime Unknown.